Welcome to episode 10 of What's on Your Workbench. Morning, afternoon, all, and especially Chili. How are you doing?
I am just peachy. How about you?
I am doing great. It's been a bit busy, but it's good. It's the things are just kind of plateauing along, which is kind of a nice spot to be at the moment. Nothing is too crazy. Um, I know you've been away on
Can
holidays,
can we
so
address
go
can,
ahead.
can we address the blue elephant in the room?
The blue
Is
elephant.
is that a new piece of kit I see in front of your face?
My microphone?
Yeah.
No, actually, it's not. It's
Oh,
it
it's
just have.
big.
I had computer issues, so the computer I normally use is resetting and restarting and updating. So I actually borrowed my wife's computer or Surface, and it just has a lower screen or lower camera, so now you can actually see the microphone. No,
I
because
see. We're
when you
we're
mentioned
just
the
getting a
blue,
peek behind the curtain today.
yeah, when you mentioned the blue machine, I was like, well, it's not behind me, but it's in front of me because I did pick up a nice blue machine on Saturday this week where I got a 1988 bandsaw, and
I
that thing
saw that.
is awesome. And unfortunately, it's not really something on my workbench, but it did get a little bit of love this weekend. Just getting, I think I had to put 10 new bolts in it that had were managed to be missing over the last 10 years of its life or last 30 years of its life. I had to put some more rubber in there and then just kind of give it a good cleanup. But that thing is awesome. I've given a bit of a test out and first time ever using a bandsaw. And yeah, that thing is lethal, but it's going to be a really useful tool and didn't cost me anything.
Yeah.
So that's always a absolute bonus. Is a very generous gift from a family friend. So he's his son is a shop teacher, and the school that he worked at was getting rid of their bandsaw because of some reason. And so he picked that up, and then he didn't need this one any longer. So it was just taking up room in his shed. And I was going up there to visit my father, who's working on his car at the moment. And yeah, he was like, "Oh, could you bring a trailer up? There could be a bandsaw." And I'm like, "There will be a trailer, and that bandsaw will be coming back with us." Uh, Even if I have to leave the kids behind and throw it in the back of the car. They didn't like that idea. They were like, no, you take the kid. I'm like, okay. But no, it's great. So I've got a few projects coming up where I'm going to definitely be using it, and it'll be way easier because typically at the moment, if I do any cuts like that, it's with a jigsaw. And sometimes with a jigsaw, I end up mounting it in a clamp upside down and using it as a bandsaw just because you get so much better control. As horrible as it sounds, it just seems to be way easier to do that when you're doing finer pieces. But now I have a bandsaw, I can do it properly, which is actually quite nice. So chances of losing a finger have probably gone down. I would hope so.
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, we'll see. We'll see. They're all still there though. They're all still there.
Yeah,
Everybody always brings that up whenever I like highlight a new machine that I've got. They're like, "How many fingers have you still got?" It's like, "Still got 10." I don't know what you're talking about. I don't hurt myself that often.
let's just ask him. Do we count half fingers?
Yeah, yeah. Well, I'm not even down to half. I've got some decent scars on them, but technically, I've never had any stitches yet, so I'm counting for a win.
I think that the modern school of thought when it comes to a woodworking shop is that the the absolute must tool you have to have, the workhorse of your shop, is going to be your table saw.
Yep.
And I tend to disagree with that. And that might be because majority of what I do is hand tool work. um, I think a bandsaw is the best. If you can pick one and only one, I think a good bandsaw is really the way to go, because you can process larger raw material with it. Almost anything you can do on a table saw, you can do on a bandsaw, with the exception of like dados and grooves,
Yep.
which I have hand tools for, and I prefer to do those with hand tools. So yeah, I think a bandsaw is your best bang for your buck.
Yeah, it's definitely one of those tools that it wasn't the top of my list because pretty well the top of my list is a good belt sander or disc sander, and then a drill press, and then a bandsaw, and then a circular, like a bench saw, circular bench saw. But yeah, I'm not going to turn down one that's turned up because it's actually one of the favored tools for working with foam. Like a lot of the prop makers that are using foam, they love bandsaws because you can get a nice 45-degree. You can, I mean, it obviously cuts foam like butter, and it saves trying to, because otherwise if you're using like a blade, you've got to sharpen it pretty well every couple runs because it just dulls it so quick. So yeah, it's definitely, I'm super excited to have it in the shop, and I'm looking at it right now.
Yeah, and it's not as messy or dangerous, honestly, as a hot knife is.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like
so,
the hot knives work great. Like they're amazing. But having this super hot, like unguarded random blade around your shop as you're working isn't the safest way to go.
Yeah. 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 And it's nice because there are a couple bits I need to get for it. So it's got a nice fence and stuff on it, but because it doesn't have anything like that at the moment, but we'll get there. And already it's going to be awesome. So, but enough of random tool discussions. What is on your workbench this week, Chili?
Well, I just got back from vacation, literally like yesterday. So
you got millions.
I don't have a ton really in the works. So we're gonna leave this up to you as to what you want to discuss.
Okay.
Because I've got a couple of things that I've been fiddle farting around with since I got home. One is that I have some freestanding planters that I'm going to be making for a new client, and they're similar, but they're going in two different locations. One's going to her house. Another one is going to a condo that they own for their tenant. So I'm starting. I've got it roughly, figured out already, but now I'm starting to draw out joinery and make my exact plans, so I can fine tune my material list and all that. The other thing is that we talked a little bit a few weeks ago about, bless you, about chip carving when I carved the name in the top of that urn. Well, I've been working a little bit with that, and I carved this rosette absolutely masterfully, as you can tell. For those who are watching on YouTube, you'll know that I'm completely full of crap. For those who are listening on a podcast, please just naively continue to believe that I'm amazing at this.
I don't know. It looks pretty good from here.
Yeah, I put a blur filter on my camera so you can't
move it around. It looks great. Great.
I'll leave it up to you. What do you want to talk about?
I think let's talk about those planters and your design process there, because that looks like some pretty serious design work you've got going on. Like mine, it's better. Like usually mine is a Sharpie on the workbench with some kind of like rough scribble outs and then go from there. So that looks like you've gone pretty deep into how you're going to do that.
So I've found that I used to really do everything like that too, just very roughed out and figure it out as I go. And there's some things that it's still easiest to do that way for me. But there's I found that now that I'm working on a timeline and, I've got projects back to back to back, it helps a lot if I take a little bit of time in the front end to really draw and plan some stuff out, make cut lists, things like that. It becomes a much more efficient use of my time through the project if I have that stuff kind of mapped out. So I don't do I don't use any computer programs for it. I know a lot of craft workers that do use different programs for making a takeoff list and drawing things out in CAD and all that. And part of that's because they're using those to show to their client. They're saying, here's what it will look like and get it signed off on. I don't work that way. I take a little bit more artistic approach to things. So my clients come to me, they see my body of work, they know what I can do, they know that they like it. They give me some guidance as far as um, the functionality of the piece, what it has to have, what it has to do, and some styling cues, what they like. A lot of clients don't even know that. They leave it up to me based on my walkthrough of their house or
Yeah.
their business, whatever it is. Um, so I don't do really super detailed drawings and stuff because I can't. For one, I'm artistically inept.
Yeah. When
Like
you
when you
work a
put a
lot
color
with
pencil in my hand,
a
I
lot
turn
with
into
raw
a figure.
materials as well, where
Yeah,
you're going to listen to what the materials are telling you what to do as well.
yeah. So this is just one of them that I've got doodled out here. Um, and basically, what I did was I just made an overall drawing so that I know my scale. I can see it roughly with my dimensions. This one here is going to be completely enclosed in cedar, so it's going to be very monolithic, which fits the 1920s architecture of the condo building that it's going in. And that means that inside of it, there needs to be a steel frame.
Oh,
So
wow.
I then drew out my steel frame to make sure I know cut lengths of the steel, as well as where those weld joints are going to be. And then I know that these bottom rails are going to be very simple butt joint welds. But these ones up here, I'm going to do a little bit differently. And I haven't done it this way before because I have been too chicken to try it. But it's basically all three pieces are going to be cut at a compound miter, compound 45, so that all three pieces come together in one single joint.
Yep.
And then you weld that. And the theory is that it's going to be a little bit cleaner joinery. The downside is it's probably going to be a little bit more of a setup nightmare as far as getting things set and clamped in place.
Yeah, holding it in place while you weld it.
Yeah, because the hard part about welding a joint is you can't just set it up in place and then start to tack, because the heat and the material that you're putting into that joint when you weld will move the pieces around. So you really have to clamp things in really solid. And in a full-time fab shop where all they're doing is metal fab, they have these really fancy, incredibly expensive fab tables that help you do that. I don't have that space, nor do I have that kind of cheddar laying around. So I've got a pretty small weld bench that I use. That was my grandpa's. So kind of figuring that stuff out is fun sometimes. The other one I don't have drawn out all the way yet, but it's going to be the same size, 4 foot long, 3 foot tall, 18 inches deep. But it will be open underneath the planter and just have an open shelf. So the legs will be wood on that one. There won't be metal fab like there is on this one for the condo.
Okay.
And then the inside of each of them, there will be a sheet metal tub that I make that sets in, is sloped towards the center. And then I'm going to put in a brass fitting for a drain, and run a drain line out the back, so that any excess moisture is taken away.
Oh, wow. That sounds pretty epic to me. I made some planters back last year, and I think it was some old pallets and some treated pine, and yeah, about 50 million screws. So definitely not on the scale that you did. But going back to the design process, it's interesting that you're doing it that way, because I dabbled a little bit when I first started doing some serious making. When I made some cabinets and I made a toy workbench, I went the route of computer modeling, and it was mainly so that I could figure out, like you said, the cut list and what I needed to buy. Because prior to that, it was always just like, well, yeah, about that much wood. And then you got to, halfway through, you got to run back to the store, get some more. and then you're like got all this extra left over, which isn't always a bad thing. But when it was like like you said, the budget starts to tighten up, it was like, okay, what do I actually need? What sizes should I get? And for me, it was like a bit of, you know, you got that back and forth. You're like, oh, what sizes of wood are the typical sizes? Which ones should I use for this project? And then I've got to put them into the program, design it up. But the thing that I really like about that process, and it's funny because I've got a sketchbook that I use for work, right? Like I keep all my work notes in if I'm in a meeting, and one half of it's all my work stuff, and the back of it's all my project stuff. Because I'll sit there and I'll have an idea, and I'll just kind of quickly sketch it out, and really, I'm just kind of throwing a design together. Because in my mind, or the way I like to think of it, the way I've heard people describe it, is the design is the first time you build it. So you're building it in your head, and as you draw it out, I'll actually quite often draw the steps that I'm going to do. Be like, step one, I'm going to do this. Step two, I'm going to do that. And then that way, as I'm doing that design process, in my mind, I'm actually building it going, okay, does that make sense that I do that first or that first or that first? Because with so many things, it's about that order of operations. If you do one thing first, it's going to be a lot harder to go back and do that. So yeah, it's like when you first showed up that picture, I could have sworn it was computer generated. It looked so good on the screen. But yeah, it's amazing what you can do with a ruler and some paper. But my dimensions are always off when I try and draw it, so I just rely on measurements. But I'm terrible because I'm so used to working in metric and imperial. I always have to make sure I put units down, because otherwise I have no idea. It's like, because I'll have one project where I'll literally be measuring something in inches, and then in centimeters, and then in meters, and then it's like, what am I doing?
Well, the trick for drawing it out is that, let's see, I don't think you can see, there we go, is isometric graph paper.
Ah,
so that helps you draw in 3 dimensions.
That makes so much sense.
Oh, if I was left to my own, if you gave me a blank sheet of paper and told me to draw something in 3 dimensions, no, not happening. I'd be totally toast.
Oh wow, it's one of those things I've known it exists, but I never would have thought about it. Huh.
That's actually awesome. Still stuff that I have from my old job, because that's what I'd use to draw out piping in a mechanical room.
Yep.
Which was like this amazing light bulb moment when somebody gave me, like, I was trying to draw it out on just regular graph paper, and one of our project managers in another office handed me a pad of that, and he was like, "Here, use this." I was like, "Oh, this is amazing!"
Wow. Yeah, no, I'll have to, one of these podcasts, I'll have to bring my notepad in. I usually have about 1 million floating around, but I don't think I've actually got. Yeah, usually mine are more like, this isn't a great example, but they're just kind of random doodles like that. And then, I mean, for me, it all comes down to the numbers next to it. I don't have to draw it accurate if I know my numbers are accurate, and that's how I usually get around it. But yeah, depending on what I'm working on, my workbench is just a complete mess. But it actually, I've actually got some plans that when I made a bag for my canoe stuff, I actually had the plans actually just staple gun to one of my doors in my shed, just so like I didn't lose it, and I could just look up and be like, oh, that's how I had that. But yeah, what I do now and stuff, that if I'm really unsure, that's when I move into like a cardboard mock-up, just to be able to be like, okay, how's that actually going to fit together and work? Because like with the fabric design stuff that I do, it's very similar, right? You've got to figure out that process of, what am I going to do first? Is this going to be easier, or is that going to be more difficult? And how much material do I need? Because again, you show up at the fabric store and you're like, do I need 1 meter? Do I need 2 meter? Do I need 3 meter? You're like, stuff that I need 15 meters. And then you're like, oh, I probably could have done with like 1 meter, but you end up with all this leftover stuff, which is glorious in its own right, but it gets expensive once you start getting specialty materials.
Yeah, for me, the drawing stuff out was a huge learning curve, because like you said, it is the first time you build it. When you go through that kind of a design, that is the first build. And I spent so much time trying to get everything completely perfect, every measurement, all of my steps completely absolute perfect. And really the reality is that until you have a fair amount of experience under your belt, it's not going to be perfect. There's going to be things that you overlook. And there's going to be things that you figure wrong in your drawing. And then when you get to, hard material, you realize, crap, I did that wrong. And you have to scrap a piece and redo it. And the hardest thing is letting yourself fail like that, letting yourself make those mistakes and being okay with it, and just realizing that, well, I'll never make that mistake again.
Yeah.
That's the big thing is, now I can really sit down and draw things out, and even pretty rough, and have a really solid order of operations to know, okay, this has to come before this has to come before this. And it's just one of those things that comes with time and experience. The more you do it, the more you're going to get better at it.
Yeah, 100%. It's one of those things that originally I'd go to a lot of work to make sure I had, a full computer generated diagram. So I had all my cut lists. I knew exactly how much wood to get. I knew where I'd make my cuts. And now I'm a bit more relaxed in, okay, I can, well, depends on what I'm making. If I'm obviously copying a piece of furniture or something, then it's a lot easier because you're just taking those measurements from something else and kind of replicating them. But then other times it's, you're just drawing it out. And it's like you've got highlighted there, it's your joins, which joins are going to matter, which ones aren't going to matter, which ones are, like if you're making a bed, it's like the width of the mattress is a key piece of information, but the height doesn't matter as much. Things like that. So it's definitely a learning curve. And the thing is, it's cheap. It does take time, but it doesn't cost much in materials to draw it out on paper. But to cut up a piece of wood, that can get expensive quite quickly. And at least the way I don't know if you're aware of my holiday approach or vacation approach, but we have a folder, and typically at the front of a folder we have an Excel spreadsheet, and it says we will leave on this date, we will arrive roughly 5 hours later, we're going to do this on this day, this on this day, we're going to visit this, and I have it all planned out. And people are like, how is that fun? And I'm like, well, we have a plan, so I don't need to show up at a place and go, oh, are we going to see all the things, are we going to miss all the things? We have a plan, and if something does change, we can go, oh, that's now, we're not going to be able to do that on that day, now we can move that around, or we can do that. And I see that as like if you've got something drawn out, if something does change, you know what you're dealing with. Oh, okay, that's changed, so that will affect these 5 other joints or these 5 other pieces. Well, if you don't do that, now you're going into unknown territory. You basically, if in your mind you went, okay, I'm going to do this, and now something's forced that change, you can't really predict how much that change is going to be. But if you've got it drawn out, you can start to see, oh, that's going to affect all of these things. I need to redesign, or I need to do this, or it doesn't have any effect.
Yeah. It's now when I'm doing things for me, either just like for our house, or because I have a wild hair and decided I want to try something, like I don't do any design. I design on the fly. And if it's something that I think I'm going to want to reproduce later on, then I'll make templates based off of what I've done. But that's because I don't have a quote that I'm working to. For clients, I have to put together a quote before, I start working on something. I have to get the go ahead. And so even though I'm not giving them, CAD drawings of something and say, here's what it's going to look like, I do have to make sure that what they want can be done within their budget. So I have to draw things out a little bit more, so I understand how much, like you said, I don't want to go buy material I don't have to, because if I spend $200 on excess material that I don't need, well, that's 3 hours of labor that I could have put into it, instead of this $200 of excess materials. So it's a little bit more important when I'm working on a client project to have these kinds of things drawn out and have a pretty good idea of exactly what I'm doing, even though all of my client stuff is one off. I will never make these planners again.
Yeah.
That's just, it's a really horrible business model, honestly. uh, it is not a very easy way to make money. You want to be able to crank out as much as something as you can in a short amount of time is really the surefire way to turn a profit. But one, I have squirrel syndrome and I get bored easily, so that doesn't work. And two, it's just not how I see my pieces. The pieces I make are all very, very personal and individual, and they have these stories that come with them. um, so I prefer to do one-off things.
Yeah.
And that requires planning.
Yeah. And that's, I mean, for me, I just enjoy that problem solving. I've got a book full of projects that I'll never do, but they're ones that I've thought about and I've gone, oh, if I was going to make that, how would I do that? And then I start drawing it up and start going, okay, well, that would have to hinge here and that would have to open up there, and start just that problem solving is what I really enjoy. So, no, that's good.
It's a great exercise
Yeah,
to
100%.
Prepare yourself for future projects, to just go through all those, what ifs and what could be kind of scenarios. Just like this is really nothing. It was just because I had this scrap of basswood. And I know that at some point I may want to do some rosettes, as inlays or something like that in a piece. So I'm just going to fiddle around with it now and see how can I lay this out. How can I, which that was the biggest part of it, more so than the actual carving, was figuring out some layouts of different geometry. And on the other side, there's actually this kind of almost like a paisley design.
Oh, yeah.
Which I did really quick in case we decided to talk about chip carving, but
backup plan. Yeah, no, that's awesome.
Yeah, so that's really all that's on my workbench for now, which will change radically over the next couple of weeks. I have both of these planters and then that cribbage table to make.
Oh, wow.
And then after that, I may be jumping into some pretty massive stuff, but
oh, geez,
we'll see.
That'll be exciting.
Yeah. So that brings me to my next point, which is, Andrew, what's on your workbench?
Well, there is a few things. I always love this because I'm actually looking at my workbench and I'm like, there's nothing. And I'm like, no, there's a whole bunch of junk on my workbench and I just cleaned it. But that's because I have a rocking chair in my workshop and I had to actually clear that, which is usually where my excess projects go. But there's not really much on my workbench at the moment, but there is something that's on my sewing desk, which is actually my work desk. But anyway, I've actually I have lots of desk space. My wife gets very mad at me that I have apparently all this space and she has nothing, but we won't get into that debate. No, but I've purchased a sewing machine because I have a project up and coming. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about that. It's not particularly interesting, but we have a medieval festival coming up at the end of June, start of July, and I have issues. And so I just can't show up and not at least try and be authentic. So I've actually been working on a whole bunch of costumes, and this, for those that can see, is basically a white piece of linen. Nothing too exciting going on because I'm working on all the undershirts and underclothes. So I've made a shift or a chemise or whatever you want to call it for my wife to wear under her dress, and then I've made a shirt for myself using some nice linen that I purchased at the fabric store. And it's not 100% authentic because I just don't have the time to completely hand sew it. So I've been compromising, which I was actually going to just talk about 2 seconds ago, how I hate compromising, but on this one, I've had no option but to compromise. And so basically I've done the main seams with the sewing machine, but then I'm doing all the finishing stitching by hand. So for those of you in the know, it's called hand felling. You won't be able to see it with the white, but basically you on a normal garment like this, if you're making it modern, you'd use a serger or an overlocker, and that would basically take the raw seams, combine it together with 3 or 4 or 5 threads, and you would see that seam like you would on any kind of t-shirt. In the probably in the Victorian era, you would pretty much always have a liner of some description. So you'd have a raw edge, but that would be hidden by the liner. So you'd have raw edge against raw edge and you'd never see it. When you go back into the more medieval, they did what they would fill the seams. So basically you would have your seam. So for those of you can't, I'm visualizing with my hands, but basically I've got, imagine my arms are the main fabric. So I've got my main stitch done at my wrists, and then you've got the seam at the top here. And so what you do is you basically fold it in and fold it over. And so you basically hide the seam within itself, and then you stitch it down. And then you basically just loop it along with a hand stitch, and you go from there. So that's where all the work really is on this project. With most things, the first attempt was way too small because I went to the fabric store, and the store I went to didn't have enough fabric. And because I didn't have a plan and I didn't have it drawn out, I bought too little fabric. And so when I made it, it didn't fit. So I decided to make some proper measurements and actually buy the right amount of fabric. So talking about making sure you do the right kind of planning. But yeah, and so now all I need to do on that one is actually just finish off the seams at the neck and the waist and the sleeves, and then that will be done. But it's definitely a fun process working with proper fabric. So this is like 100% linen, and so it has very distinct properties, which make it excellent for this kind of stuff. It's one of the few fabrics that you can buy that's a natural fiber. That's not cotton. Cotton's usually pretty easy to find, but cotton really wasn't around in the medieval period. You really needed your wools and your linen. And that's what I'm really waiting on now, is some wool that I've ordered, because it's really hard to find authentic wool products for this kind of stuff. Everything's a polyester, and I just can't do it. I can't do it.
What weight linen are you using for that?
This is just like a midweight. Again, it's really difficult these days because there's a difference between like a lightweight and an open weave. So you can have like a really open weave, but it's not a great fabric. Or you can have like, a really high quality linen it'll be a nice tight weave, but it'll be kind of a lightweight. But yeah, this is kind of a midweight to lightweight, I would say, based on that. But as part of that, what I've actually been doing as I've been searching for fabric, I've actually started making a kind of a scrapbook with all of my different fabric selections, because it's really hard to find fabric, or the correct fabric. I mean, obviously, if you go to like the equivalent of your Hobby Lobby or Michael's or whatever, or Joann's Fabric, they have a wide range. But when you actually dig deeper, when you're looking for like authentic wools or linens or silks, like they just don't have it. So you have to go online. And when you're purchasing something unseen, it's really scary, especially when some of these fabrics are upwards of $65 a meter. And so what I've been doing is I've actually been ordering, I've been ordering like samples. And usually the samples are $1 to $5 or something like that. And now what I'm doing is I'm cataloging away all those samples. So I know, I want a lightweight wool with this kind of weave. I can get it from this website. It's going to cost me this much, and this is what it actually looks like and feels like. Which is something I should have probably started a while back, but now I've just decided to be like, no, every time I'm using a real fabric or a dress fabric, I'm going to start recording all the different materials that I'm using for future reference, because otherwise, if I ever need to go and buy a silk, I'll be like, I don't know what I need, but now I can look up, I've got a sample here. Okay, so if it says lightweight, this is what that means. If it says midweight, this is what that means. Because the world of fabric is obviously it's thousands of years old. And in the modern era, if you go to the equivalent of a Joann's Fabric and it says wool, what they mean is wool like. They don't actually mean wool. And then there's like a denim could mean this, or it's just a nightmare. So I've gone, no, I'm going to just keep my own record, create my own database, and go from there. So yeah, that's what I've been working on. I'm hoping the linen works well as an underlayer. It's, historically meant to be the best underlayer. That's why it was used for thousands of years. Fortunately, our medieval festival is in winter for us, which means it'll be, beautiful weather. So hopefully with that mid-weight, lightweight linen with a mid-light wool layer, it should be quite comfortable for me and my wife. And then whatever fabrics gets left over is used on the kids. But one thing that I learned in doing this research, because again, doing this, I've been watching a lot of YouTubers, and there's a great set of women that do all this historical fabric work and dressmaking, and they're just awesome. And one of them was doing a special on different fabrics, and she did one on linen, and it was like a 40-minute, basically a documentary on the history of linen. And I don't know if you knew this, I certainly didn't, but linseed oil comes from the seeds of the same plant that they use for linen, which when you hear that out loud, it's like, that makes absolute perfect sense. But I never actually put that together. So yeah, just the little things you pick up where it's like, yeah, nothing ever got wasted back in the day.
Yeah, it's really amazing, like that. So cultures from across the world, prior to there being any interaction, via the spice trade and things like that, found out how versatile the plant was. And linen fabric was created both in Europe and in the Far East. I know at least for sure those two. And linseed oil was used in both of those places and in Africa, um, for sealing bowls, and vessels that hold liquids or food. Um, and yeah, it's an incredibly versatile plant, and a great one to where you can use every bit of it.
Yeah, and it's interesting because everybody talks up hemp these days, and hemp and linen are almost effectively the same plant. But because of hemp's importance in the Victorian age, or even earlier during like the Napoleonic Wars, for ships, for sails, for ropes, the hemp trades were very much taxed and controlled, because of that reason, because of their basically naval importance. And so yeah, it's one of those ones that like the biggest issue with linen is it creases. But if you throw in a bit of cotton or some other like mixes, you can actually change those properties very quickly. But yeah, it's definitely, I know my mother, she definitely wears a lot of linen. She has always liked linen, but I haven't really used a lot of it in my day-to-day wardrobe. But in my historical costumes, I definitely have run into it, and keen to use it more. And I mean, I treat it the same way as like using a nice wood. When you're using nice materials combined with nice tools, it's like a completely different experience. And even just hand sewing, just hand sewing with fabric is it's easy. It's really not that difficult. And when people are like, "Oh, it's so hard to do this," or "It's so hard to do that," and it's like, well, just get yourself a little bit of the good material. Try and, like, even if they're just simple tools, get the good ones, and you'll experience a night and day difference. And I know you're definitely in that camp as well.
Oh yeah. Yeah, fewer quality things are so much better than a lot of garbage.
Yeah. And I mean, sometimes
Um,
you've got to start somewhere, but yeah, once you've kind of played around with something, and it depends on the tool. Some things there's no point getting a rubbish of, but other things you can start with. But yeah, it's like once you've kind of decided that, no, this is something I'm interested in, yeah, invest as much as you can in different things.
yeah, I really like the fact that you're making this kind of your own sample swatch, so to speak, of materials, I think that's really that's a very simple thing that any craft worker or maker can do to really up their game in a very short amount of time, is to make a sample board, or a swatch book or something like that. Like I have sample pieces of, which I think they're in the other room, but sample pieces of the common woods that I can get through urban forestry around here. So the most common types of wood that grow in homes and parks around here and stuff. And I have them treated different ways, so that you can see what that end product is. You can feel it. You can see what the
Yep.
tactile sense is. And I can kind of, play around with those to see what they look like together. And, as I'm working on a project, that gives me a huge leg up. It also gives me something to show clients,
Yep.
to help them understand what they want. Because a lot of clients have no idea what the difference is between, an oil varnish finish versus oil and wax.
Yep.
They don't know. So, they need to see that and feel that. But yeah, that's a really simple thing you can do that will really, really up your game.
Yeah, and it's just and nowadays with the day and age of ordering so much stuff online, you just don't know, and wood isn't quite as bad as fabric, but fabric is so notorious for lack of information. It just is like, yeah, it'll say silk, but then you look at it and you're like, oh no, this is a polyester rayon blend made to look like a satin. And things like denim, well, denim's technically kind of a type of weave, not a type of material, but people always assume that it's, a blue denim. And it's like, well, no, really, it's actually a twill, which can be in anything. And just digging away those layers, it's like, you've got to know, okay, well, what is the type of fabric? And I mean, obviously I'm a novice at this. The real people that knows, and this is kind of why I start sitting there going, oh man, I really need to go do a night course in fabrics or something, just to get that base knowledge down. That I prefer just learning the hard way, because that's more fun. But it's just like it's like magic. Once you know the correct words and you do a search for it, your life changes. When you don't know the right words, you can spend all day searching on internet for different things. But once you kind of know, oh, I need to be searching this, and this, suddenly the world opens up. But yeah, it's something that I've just started, and it's mainly because I'm looking at purchasing fairly expensive fabrics, and I want to be able to feel. And it really, as a cheapskate like myself, it hurts my soul buying samples of fabric, because it's just like, this is just a waste. But I think the amount of money it saves in the long run by actually being able to buy the correct product, or not buying the incorrect product, probably is the more important thing, will save you in the long run.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, I think a whole other episode can be done on jargon in different craft, because that's a whole world unto itself. And sometimes if you don't know that jargon, some people just really make you feel like a dipstick,
yep.
which
And
is a pet peeve of mine. But
yeah, well, yeah, I come from an engineering background where people are writing programs and manuals and they use jargon, and I'm just like, no, like, if I can't understand it, how can you, like, that's not clear. It needs to be bulletproof. And even just dealing
yeah,
with governmental regulations through audits, and they're trying to understand what I'm saying, and I'm like, oh yeah, no, that could be interpreted about 5 different ways. I can see the confusion now, but for me it's like, no, that only means this. So yeah, and then don't even get me started on going overseas, where something like a pipe wrench isn't called a pipe wrench over here, or what we call a shifting spanner, you call a crescent wrench. And yeah, it's it's a whole new ball game. So
yeah.
all right, well, This has been great. Sorry, I feel like that was a bit of a letdown on my side. It's a huge amount of work, but it's not much to talk about when you're doing a lot of this, but that's all right.
Oh, I remember. I was gonna ask you about. So I don't remember the term you used, but for folding over those seams.
Felling,
Felling, yes.
Felling, hand felling.
When you fell those, and you're doing that finishing stitch by hand, are you just doing like just like a straight stitch from the outside, or is it like a locking stitch from the inside?
So you basically, it'll look like a running stitch from the outside. So from the side where the seam is actually on, so the inside of the shirt, you'll basically see almost like as if it was staples going along, and then so you basically go perpendicular in, and then like basically a couple threads catch it, go underneath for, depends on how good you want to be. I'm doing probably 1/4 of an inch, and then you come back through both, and then through perpendicular, and then along. So you basically, what is that? Almost a ladder stitch? Is that the correct term? That's that. I'm actually doing it at the back of my book. I'm writing all my different stitches so that I actually learn the correct ones. But it's a very common way you can even do it with a raw edge. You don't have to do like the fold over. But yeah, you end up with basically what looks like almost like a machine sewn edge on the thing, which obviously it's not, because it's not as perfect. But again, undershirt, I can get away with it, which is interesting doing this, because I would have thought you would have wanted it the other way, where that hidden stitch, because on what is effectively the inside, you don't really see that stitch at all, because you're only catching a few threads as you go along, which is, I think, how I'm going to do the more fine, like the actual proper dress for my wife. So you can't actually see that seam as much. But it was interesting because I was just working with it. My wife was like, "Oh, you've got the seams on the outside." And I was like, "Oh, no, this is the inside." And she was like, "Oh," like she couldn't even really tell which was the inside or the outside. And because it does leave quite a neat edge on it. But yeah, it's just one of those, you think, like when you look at these medieval things, like, oh, they must have been like perfect and they must have done like a great job. And then when you actually like see the historical document, the historical garments, you're like, no, they're just getting it done. They're not, unless it's like for a king or a queen or something, like they're just getting it done. And they were experts they weren't going to put in any extra effort unless it was going to be seen. Like if like undershirts and stuff, it was like, yep, just needs to be functional. They're not going to lose any sleep over it. So that's, and it's, if anybody wants to get into medieval reenacting, this is, I mean, everybody can pretty well agree that if you want to make something, start with a shirt. You pretty well can make the pattern. It's just a rectangle with 2 rectangles and then some gussets, and nobody's going to see it. So you can machine sew it if you want, you can hand sew it if you want. Nobody's really going to get upset. So it's definitely a great way to start. And that's exactly where I started, because I can spend time on it, develop my skills, and I still get a functional piece at the end, which everybody wins.
Yep.
So with that, Chili, if people want to find more of you, where can they find you?
You can find me on YouTube, Orwood Solutions, or you can find me on Instagram at OrwoodCS. How about you?
Mainly on the YouTube. So that's currently where I exist, or at craftybeetroot.com. If you want to find more about the podcast, we're at whatsonyourworkbench.podbean.com. Yeah, go ahead and drop in there. You should be able to find us on Spotify, Apple, iTunes, all of the great podcast hosting sites. If you could be so kind as to leave comments or reviews. And we are also on YouTube. I believe I need to check, make sure all the videos are going up, but they should be all up there. So
I hope so. I have to recommend to people that if you can, YouTube is the way to go, because I talk with my hands and Andrew is beautiful.
I didn't know your eyesight was so bad, Chili, but we'll get you some glasses. All right, so we will catch you later when we find out what's on your workbench.